There's a nuclear reactor somewhere under the Greenland ice. It's been there since 1964, buried, slowly drifting toward the coast. The army that put it there thought the glacier would steal it forever. But they were wrong about that, and they were wrong about something bigger. The reactor was actually built to power. Not a research station, not a weather post. Something the US had never attempted before and has never stopped wanting. Today, America is back in Greenland. But to understand what it's building now, you first have to understand what it was trying to build then, and why the glacier stopped it. To understand what the US was planning, you have to look past the city label. It wasn't a city in any normal sense. It was more like a specialized military outpost crammed into a series of ice trenches. The construction was pretty practical. They used these massive Swiss snow cutters called Peter plows to chew through the ice cap at 1,200 cubic yards an hour. That created a network of about 21 parallel trenches that they roofed over with corrugated steel and buried back under the snow. Inside these corridors, they dropped in prefabricated wooden buildings for the troops. The longest one, nicknamed Main Street, was 1,100 feet long, about 3.5 football fields end to end, and the whole network eventually stretched for nearly 2 miles. Inside those tunnels, they had everything. Sleeping quarters, a kitchen, a hospital, even a small barber shop and a library. It functioned like a tiny settlement compressed into a frozen world. But powering a place like that 125 miles inland was the real challenge, which is why, in 1960, they installed the PM-2A. It was a portable nuclear reactor designed to fit inside a C-130 cargo plane. Though at 330 tons total, getting it there was its own engineering challenge. The components were flown into Pituffik, then hauled 138 miles across the ice on tractor-pulled sleds before being reassembled on site. Once it was assembled, it ran the entire complex and powered a steam probe that melted a reservoir deep in the ice. That gave them 10,000 gallons of fresh water every day. Water that had originally fallen as snow about 2,000 years ago. Camp Century was never the end goal. It was a proof of concept for a massive classified program called Project Iceworm. And once you see what Iceworm was actually proposing, the reason for burying a nuclear reactor in the middle of nowhere suddenly clicks. The military was asking, what if we used the entire Greenland ice sheet as a frozen launch pad for nuclear missiles? The 1960 report, Strategic Value of the Greenland Ice Cap, laid it all out. A tunnel network 4,000 kilometers long, covering 52,000 square miles of northern Greenland. Inside, 600 nuclear missiles on railway tracks, constantly moving so the Soviets could never pin them down. If your missiles are always shifting position and the enemy doesn't know where they can't take them out in a first strike. The ice becomes your defensive shield. But Iceworm was just one part of a much broader American strategy that had been building for years. The US had been in Greenland since World War II, and since 1951, a formal NATO agreement with Denmark had given America the right to station forces there. Throughout the 50s and 60s, they were building airfields and radar stations across the island. The one that still matters most today is Pituffik Space Base, on the northwest coast about 950 miles from the North Pole. At its Cold War peak, it housed over 6,000 personnel. Today, that number is around 150 active duty service members. But its real value was never the headcount. It was the radar. If a ballistic missile is launched from Russia on a polar trajectory toward North America, Pituffik's systems are usually the first to see it. A tripwire at the top of the world. Camp Century, then, was just the most ambitious node in that network, where the logic of locking down Greenland as a strategic platform got pushed to its absolute limit, and where it eventually ran into physical ones. So what actually killed it? Not politics, not budget cuts, just a fundamental mismatch between engineering and physics. When you dig a tunnel through rock, the rock stays put. Ice doesn't work that way. Under pressure, ice behaves less like a solid and more like a slow-moving liquid. It's called ice creep. The ice sheet deforms under its own weight, flowing outward towards the coasts. Any void you open up inside it, the surrounding ice starts pushing in to fill, steadily, without ever stopping. At Camp Century, they ran into this almost immediately. Within 4 years, the walls were closing in. The ceilings were dropping and the corridors were narrowing so fast that crews had to constantly recut the passages just to keep them open. The steel arches were buckling, and the heat from the buildings and the reactor was making it worse. Warmer ice creeps even faster. By 1963, they shut the reactor down. A year later, it was hauled out in pieces. By 1967, the base was formally abandoned, leaving behind 9,200 tons of physical waste, diesel fuel, PCBs, radioactive coolant. They assumed the glacier would seal it forever. With the ice thinning today, that assumption is becoming Greenland's problem to solve, not America's. But the bigger realization was simpler. If they couldn't keep 21 trenches open for a few years, a continental-scale tunnel network 4,000 kilometers long was never going to happen. The ice moved faster than they could dig, and that was the end of it. The project failed. The logic behind it didn't, because the reason the US wanted to bury missiles under Greenland in the first place was geographic, and geography doesn't change. Greenland sits at the top of the world between North America and Europe. The shortest flight paths between the major population and industrial centers of North America and Eurasia pass directly over or near it. During the Cold War, that position made Greenland essential for detecting a Soviet attack. The stretch of ocean between Greenland, Iceland and the UK was the main passage Soviet submarines had to cross to reach the Atlantic. That logic never died. In 2019, during his first term, Donald Trump proposed buying Greenland outright. Denmark called it absurd. The idea was dropped, but it never went away. In 2025, Donald Trump gets re-elected, and Greenland is one of the first things he goes after.
National security purposes. And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Greenland have been part of the Danish kingdom for 800 years. Mr. Trump, f*** off.
But even as the diplomatic confrontation was playing out publicly, the Pentagon was already moving quietly. In March 2026, the head of US Northern Command testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee that the US is in active talks to expand its military presence across Greenland. Not just at Pituffik, but at 3 new locations, including former Cold War bases it abandoned decades ago. The US Vice President J.D. Vance says it fairly directly in early 2026. The entire US missile defense architecture depends on security in the Arctic, and Greenland is the most strategically positioned territory in that Arctic. So the tunnels failed. The ice took the base. But the island stayed exactly as important as it ever was. Which is where this stops being a Cold War story and starts being a very current one. Because the US is back in Greenland and it's building again. The most visible piece is Pituffik itself. The Pentagon has already committed tens of millions of dollars to upgrade the base, expanding the runway, adding a vessel to keep the port clear of icebergs, overhauling facilities that have suffered decades of Arctic wear. Under the Golden Dome program, Pituffik is being transformed from a detection post into an active interception node, hypersonic tracking sensors, interceptor batteries, a new network operations center. It's no longer just a tripwire. It's a weapon. And then there are the 3 new locations. Narsarsuaq in the south, a deep water port the US built during World War II and handed back in the 1950s. Kangerlussuaq in the southwest, a long runway capable of handling large military aircraft returned in the 1990s. A third site not yet disclosed. The US wants fighters, tankers, special operations forces and naval assets permanently stationed across the island. It's trying to rebuild a network it abandoned, this time through negotiation rather than secrecy. Then there's what's in the ground. Greenland holds an estimated 36 to 42 million metric tons of rare earth oxides, potentially the world's second largest reserve after China. These are the materials inside every electric vehicle motor, AI chip, missile guidance system, and next-generation fighter jet. In 2025, China banned exports of several of them, including gallium and germanium, cutting off Western supply chains and making Greenland's geological position suddenly urgent. The first American-backed response on the ground is the Tan Breeze project in the south, a pilot plant already under construction as of early 2026, a port being developed on a deep-water fjord, and a supply chain designed to move rare earth concentrate from the island to North American refineries, with first production targeted for late 2028. But this isn't just a defense supply chain story anymore. The same minerals that go into missile systems also go into AI infrastructure. Greenland's climate, freezing year-round, makes it one of the most energy-efficient places on Earth to run data centers. Projects targeting 1.5 gigawatts of capacity on the coast are already in development. The investors circling Greenlandic mining stocks are the same funds behind the biggest tech companies in the world. And the US isn't the only one who has figured this out. China has been working Greenland for years under its Polar Silk Road initiative, approaching the island about airport construction, backing mining interests, building influence through infrastructure the same way it has across the developing world. Greenland's response has been to fast-track investment screening laws that give it the power to reject deals with too many political strings attached. The island is not passive in any of this. It's navigating carefully and very much on its own terms. So the context isn't really about who controls Greenland. It's about who builds there first, who finances what gets dug out of the ground, and who shapes what the island looks like for the next 50 years. America's first attempt at Greenland was literal: tunnels dug into a moving glacier, a nuclear reactor dragged across the ice on sleds, hundreds of miles of corridors planned for missiles that would never arrive. The ice crushed all of it. What's left of Camp Century is still down there, slowly drifting toward the coast. But the impulse that built it never got buried with it. The tools are different now. No peter plows, no reactor on sleds, no tunnels. The contest now plays out differently. How do you build a permanent position in Greenland before someone else does? And is this a race the US can actually win? Or is Greenland going to chart its own course no matter who shows up with money and military ambitions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more deep dives into the world's most ambitious engineering projects, make sure to subscribe to Megabuilds. Thanks for watching.